Howdy, y'alls. My name's Dr. Edwards, Dr. E for short, and I'm your instructor for Anthropology 101 this term. Gotta say, I'm really excited. I love teaching these intro anthro courses because I love anthropology and I love sharing my passion for anthropology with others. And more than that, I think anthropology is kind of like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I say this for a couple of reasons. Anthropology, broadly defined, is the study of the human condition, the study of people, Homo sapiens. All right? And anthropology lets us understand the world around us, all the different cultural diversity that we see all around the world, the biological diversity, the linguistic diversity. And in so doing, it also helps give us insight into ourselves. All right? I find this a really cool thing. And so for me, anthropology isn't just an academic discipline, it's a way of life. All right? I always have my anthropology hat on. I really can't do anything without using my anthropological skills. All right? And at a really basic level, that's because the entire world is culturally defined, right? People make decisions and choices that define our world. And so, as an anthropologist, the entire world is my oyster to research, all right? Which is really cool. So, more on that. Anthropology is what we call a holistic discipline, all right? Generally speaking, it's divided up into 4 or 5 subdisciplines, all right? We have cultural anthropology, we have archaeology, we have biological or physical anthropology, and we have linguistics. Now, I'm going to go over these, all right, in a little more detail here, but right now I want to kind of cover the basics of the different subdisciplines. There's also one more subdiscipline, depending on who you speak to, all right? So we call it the 5th subdiscipline, and that is applied anthropology, all right? So, cultural anthropology studies the unique and shared social and cultural habits of people, such as kinship, marriage, politics, subsistence systems, and belief systems. All right. Not everyone does it the same. All right. If you look around, I mean, look at a National Geographic, look at the news. Right. It's really clear that not everyone does it the same way. Well, cultural anthropology is really about understanding why people do things the way they do. All right, there's a rhyme to the madness, if you would. Right, it's not complete chaos. And the primary method that cultural anthropologists use is what we call the ethnographic method. All right. And key to that is something that we call participant observation, right? And this is, if you've read about anthropology, this tends to be stuff that's really kind of sexy, if you would. This is where anthropologists go and live with the community to develop an inside or emic understanding of them, all right? Now, at the same time that they develop an inside understanding of them, they're also, because they're an outsider, all right, they also are using what we call an etic perspective, right? An outside perspective. And both of these perspectives, emic and etic, are really important for developing an inside and outside understanding of another group. Okay? Key things that we do in terms of this ethnographic method and participant observation is that we live with this group for an extended period of time. Like a weekend is not going to cut it. We're not talking tourism here. For example, my own ethnographic research is really extended. I kind of started as a Peace Corps volunteer where I lived in a mud hut for 3 years on the edge of the Sahara. And during that time, I learned 2 local languages, the colonial language, and I gained great insight into the daily activities of the people that I was living with, right? And I also participant observation in those activities. I did everything from plant fields of corn and sorghum and millet I worked with traditional hunters. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. I'm just trying to give you a little taste of what I'm talking about here. Uh, yeah, you can read more about my research and the stuff that I do as an anthropologist in my instructor announcement. All right, my welcome announcement. I'll give you some more kind of insight and details. Okay, next subdiscipline is archaeology. All right, archaeology studies past human civilizations through their material remains. Okay, that's the important part. Okay, we are studying past peoples through the stuff they've left behind. All right, the physical evidence that we can find gives us insight into these past peoples. All right, and some of the peoples really aren't gone. Like the Maya, people say that the Maya just disappeared. No, the Maya didn't just disappear. They changed, right? And there are still many people that call themselves Mayan. There's several dialects of it spoken throughout Central and South America. Central America, not South. But yeah, so archaeology is all about understanding these past peoples, all right, through the stuff they leave behind. And yeah, you might focus on the exotic, like Egyptian temple complexes, Mayan religious centers, Mayan pyramids, stuff like that, the Parthenon of Greece, right? That's the sexy stuff. However, that isn't what most archaeology is. Not at all. Right? Most archaeology is in your backyard, in your neighborhoods, in your states, in your countries. And it's not necessarily focused on the big exotic stuff. Okay, yeah, that's really fun and interesting, but that just isn't what most archaeology is. I've worked as an archaeologist off and on throughout my career. I love it. It's really fun stuff. But in a typical sort of archaeological work would be doing an archaeological survey of a chunk of land that is going to be developed. All right. In fact, we actually have a special law called Section 106 that requires any development that involves any federal funds to have a cultural resource assessment completed. In other words, if you're going to build a new housing development or a shopping mall or a parking lot or anything, right, that involves federal money or state money, you have to hire someone like me to go and check out the land. That starts with a lot of background research, going to state archives, looking through all the existing information about that chunk of land, everything that's been there through written history, looking at old maps, all that stuff. And then you actually get to go out and walk the land. And when you do that, you try to identify the stuff that you found in your background research, and you look for new stuff as well. Most of the time, the stuff that we find is not exotic. All right, doesn't mean it's not cool. I got to stress that. I've found tons of cool stuff. I have found some of the oldest arrowheads in North America. All right, 8 to 12,000 years old. Right. Old stuff for North America. And I got to tell you, holding a piece of history in your hand like that is a thrill. To find it and hold it is just awesome. Sometimes, if we find something significant, right, and there's special criteria about what's significant, we conduct testing. All right, and then if we still think, and testing is limited, we might put in what's called a unit, right, where we just excavate 1 square meter, all right, in an area that we think is going to reveal more information about the site. If we still find significant stuff, then it might evolve to a full-scale excavation, all right? But for the most part, full-scale excavations are pretty rare, right? And this is kind of because most of the stuff that we find isn't significant, all right? Like, here in Oregon, I find tons of old log cabins. All right. There's already many on the Historic National Register, and another log cabin isn't going to provide more insight. okay, into that time period in history. So they're, for the most part, not considered significant, so we're not going to do more work on them. But give you an example of something that we would. I found a pioneer cemetery here in Oregon that was previously undocumented. Had no headstones or anything. The only way I was able to identify this was through slight slumps in the ground that were oriented in a particular fashion. And that we didn't excavate because it's unethical for the most part to excavate human remains, but we were able to do a lot of research in the area and develop an interpretive center for it. Another good example, well, a better example, for actually doing a full-scale excavation. I used to live in North Carolina and did a lot of archaeology in the southeast. And back there, we came across an incredible site that had 10,000 years of human occupation in one location. All right, so back to prehistoric Paleo Indians, all right, all the way up to the 1800s. Okay, and it was really cool because you could see one group right in one strata, and then another group in another strata, and another group on top of that, and another group on top of that. It was a good place to live, right? It happened to be at a confluence of two rivers, right? So good water. Really cool. And so that was a site that we worked on for an entire summer, excavating the entire thing, right? And one of the reasons it was significant because of that depth of occupation, and it was going to be destroyed, right? They were building a water reservoir that this thing would have been inundated with, and so. Because it was going to be destroyed and it was significant, we were able to argue that we need to get as much information out of this before it's destroyed. And so we did a full-scale excavation. Anyway, that should give you a taste of archaeology. All right. Next up, physical and or biological anthropology. All right. This is all about the evolutions of humans, right? The variability and their unique adaptations to environmental stresses. So using an evolutionary perspective, we examine not only the physical form of humans, the bones, muscles, and organs, but also how it functions to allow survival and reproduction. Okay? So within physical and biological, there's lots of kind of like subfields, right? You have folks that specialize in what we call paleoanthropology, and they study the evolution of primates and hominids, right? Ancient human-like organisms, species. And they do that through the fossil record, right? Things like Lucy, right? An Australopithecus that was found in Africa, right? Paleoanthropology. They are looking at ancient human evolution. There are also folks that study comparative anatomy, right? That are looking between modern humans and ancient humans, and other human relatives like primates and the great apes. Okay, we're all related. Never forget that Homo sapiens, us humans, are the fifth great ape. You got gorillas, orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. We have folks that specialize in skeletal biology, right? They're looking at relatively modern humans and relatively modern changes to their physiology. We also have forensic anthropologists, which fall under the category of physical and biological. These folks, they tend to work with modern humans, right, to understand the diseases and conditions that these people live in. Do a lot of work with recently deceased individuals. If you ever seen what is that show, Bones, right? She's a forensic anthropologist. and she's used by law enforcement to understand causes of death. All right, how old skeletal remains are, things like that. It's really important to note, I mentioned it briefly earlier, but working with human remains is a pretty contentious issue, okay? There's lots of legal issues associated with it. It's a really cool discipline. I teach at another institution. I teach a course on the evolution of human sexuality, right? And we do a lot of comparative research between modern humans and human relatives, right? Like primates and great apes, all right? Um, yeah. That's physical, biological. Moving on, linguistics. Linguistics is all about the study of human language, right? How language developed, how it evolves, how it changes through time, the similarities and differences between languages. How language is acquired. Like you're not born ready to speak. Okay, you don't come out of the womb going, ah! Hi, how you doing? No, it's learned, right? It's acquired, right? And there's unique systems of language acquisition. Here's a crazy example. In some groups in South America, they have a unique marriage pattern where you marry someone outside of your language group. Okay, and then this person, it's usually the woman, the wife, that comes and lives with the male and his family. And just imagine that, right? You've married this person and you don't speak the language. You can't communicate besides charades. And so they kind of go through a period of charades and stuff. But the wife, through this entire time, she's listening to this new language. And then all of a sudden one day she just starts speaking it. It's really cool. The point is, different cultural groups acquire language differently, which is cool. One thing that I love to stress about linguistic anthropology is you kind of approach it as language is culture, culture is language. All right. The way we describe things, the very words that we use are culturally influenced, right? So linguistics also kind of has a cultural element to it. A really cool modern example that linguistic anthropologists study are the use of emoticons and emojis and abbreviated text speech, right? Like see you in a bit, spelled CU in a bit. The various abbreviations that are used in text talk, things like that. It's a really cool modern example of that. You can really see changes in language, right? Moving on. Oh, one last thing about language. It's one thing to speak another language, right? To have a proficiency in speaking it, but you really develop an intimate understanding of another language when you actually think in it, all right? Difference between speaking and thinking, okay? The thinking is the cultural aspect, right? Having all the nuances, understanding all the nuances of the language, not just necessarily putting it grammatically correct, okay? That's speaking versus thinking. Okay, enough about linguistics. Next up is applied anthropology. And I gotta say, I love me some applied anthropology. Applied anthropology is really broad, okay, and for good reason. A basic definition of applied anthropology is using anthropological skills and understandings to solve real-world problems, okay? I actually did my master's degree in applied anthropology because largely because of my Peace Corps experience. I had gone on, lived abroad in a very rural, remote area, and after that experience, I was driven to use my anthropological skills to help address problems, right? Problems that I saw with the peoples that I was living with, right? Not what I defined as a problem, right? But what they saw as problems, right? Helping them to meet their wants and needs. And so I did a lot of work as an anthropologist in international conservation and development, right? I'll give you a quick example here on the development side. I worked with a women's group in my village, a village of about 300 people. And women, let me give you a little background here. Women are at a severe disadvantage where I was working in West Africa, Mali. All right, they're considered second-class citizens, and so one of the major issues that Mali faces in terms of development is women's rights. All right. Reproductive rights, economic opportunities, and education. Right, these are paramount. Right, so I worked with a group of women where we developed a cooperative where all the women in this village, right, not all, but the vast majority, there's about 50 of them or so, where we built a community garden, and all the women worked on it together, right, to grow the garden and harvest the garden and then sell the veggies in local markets. Now, the profits that were generated from this project, a little went back to reinvesting in the garden, right? Got to buy more seeds and stock to grow another crop. But the vast majority of the money was, first, it was used to provide microloans to women, cooperative members, so they could pursue their own interests, right? Such as plant their own garden, right? So they can have their own individual profit from it, to buy things for their household, to help pay for their children to go to school, their female children in particular, to go to school. In addition, we also, there were some girls in the communities whose mothers weren't members of the cooperatives, and so we set up a special scholarship fund for them so they could go to school and get educated. So that's a good example of applied anthropology, using anthropological skills and understandings, right, to help meet the needs and wants and or solve problems, right, real world problems. My entire master's thesis and doctoral dissertation were also examples of applied anthropology, but I don't want to go off on them right now. All right. That kind of covers the five major subdisciplines. Be sure to read the written portion of my announcement. I have more details and things like that in there, some extra resources. Don't forget that you need to read chapters 1 and 2 in our main text. You have some assignments this week as well. You got an initial discussion, anthropology and research methods. You also have, you start looking at your final project, milestone 1. Oh yeah, and you have another discussion as well. You have first impressions of anthropology. Make sure to read our materials before you try to participate in the discussions, right? Because you need to have the background information to be able to talk about it. Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry if I've droned on too much, but I want to give you a good start and insight to help you understand our materials from the get-go. So I'll leave it there. You guys have a great one, and I'll see you in the discussion forums. Take care.